All right, friends, we are talking about back to school. What does back to school mean? What are we doing, Shannon? Well, back to school, it's not just like your cool Crayolas that you're getting, although that was always my favorite part, or your new fresh backpack, or your new awesome jeans that you're going to wear, or your sweatpants, because after the last couple or 18 months that we've been in school, let's be honest, sweatpants have probably been our friend. And I think a lot of us are gearing back up for what school will look like for our kids as we go back. But I'd be remiss if we didn't start talking about the really big expense that comes with going back to school, and that is college planning. So I'm going to break down the values part of what you should be thinking about from a college perspective, what you need to be doing with your kids, and how you should be saving for it. So do me a favor. If you know somebody that you've had this conversation with or has students your age and you've been wanting to have this conversation with them or starting the conversation in your own household, let's share this episode of the Thrive Forward podcast and join me now as we get into it. All right, let's get to the meat of this conversation. Now, when we start to talk about college planning or education planning, I think this is a big topic with lots of different areas. In fact, I could probably spend many different episodes breaking down a lot of different things. So as always, financial planning is very personal. None of this is to be constituted as advice. In fact, it should be an opportunity to start creating conversations. But I want you to feel educated around some of these topics so that when you do sit down with myself or whomever your financial professional is that you utilize or are sitting down and doing this yourself, you have a little bit more knowledge to be dangerous with, at least we'll say in this perspective. So what I start these conversations with are, you are the parent or the grandparent in some of these situations. You are not the individual that is probably attending college and having to save for this element of finances. You may be on this journey at very different spaces. So when we start to talk about this, I'm going to try to be very broad or paint a broad brush when having some of these conversations, because I realize we're all coming from it at different points in our lives and at different abilities to be able to financially plan for things. That being said, I will use some of my own personal experiences. I will use some of the resources that I use with my clients and talk about some of the things that we do from a general financial planning conversation. Now, a lot of times this college planning conversation may come a few years before your individual is headed out the door, or it can happen for some of my clients as soon as they give birth. It is just depending on where you are in your financial journey and your life cycle, and basically what you were taught from a financial health standpoint from your relationships with those that raised you or you were around. You see, I talk a lot of times about how our emotions and things that we were taught from generations before us impact how we make decisions. So for me, for instance, college was something that was important in my family. I was not the first person to attend college. In fact, both of my grandparents had the luxury of being able to go to school, and so did both of my parents. And I knew I was going to head off to college as well. My family are many creative individuals. So when I told them that I was going to school for financial planning, I think I got a deer in the headlights look. Like, what are you doing? Needless to say, I did know what I wanted to do when I walked in the door. Just kidding. Do you know how many times I changed my major? In the first year of my freshman year of college, quite a few different times. I did not have my life all the way planned out. And see, that's the conversation that I have with many of my clients, no matter if they're starting, especially at birth, or if it's just a few years out. We don't know what we want to do right when we get to those doors of college. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Then we might go to college and we might exit and go into the workforce and not do anything that our degree was for. And not everyone is meant to go to a 4-year university. There are plenty of trade schools and community colleges that are wonderful sources of education, depending on the career choice or where your student is at. So we're going to talk about those in all different aspects. And your student may even be someone who decides to join the armed forces. That is a whole different plan. So when I do college planning with my clients, I look for flexibility because, again, we can't plan always for our own lives, let alone for our children's lives. So being able to have that level of flexibility is something that's important. A lot of times clients come to me and they say, you know what, Shannon, I heard about these college savings plans. Is that the only way I can save for college? No, friends. You can plan for college in lots of different aspects of things. And of course, investing is personal and it absolutely depends on where you are from a financial standpoint. I also look at it from an aspect that, are you sacrificing to save for your children's education and not saving for your own retirement? So again, prioritizing the values and things that are important in your life so that you are identifying those buckets that you need to be filling first. And those sub buckets or different kinds of pie, sometimes I refer to them as different things, but needless to say, how are we giving you options? I talk about options in retirement, but how are we giving you options for education planning as well? Some individuals are not going to be able to sock away the thousands and thousands of dollars that it is going to cost for tuition. For example, for those of you that live in Minnesota, and I'll use it because it's our home state and I'm a Gopher fan. No, I'm not an alum, but I looked up this state tuition for the University of Minnesota. And to live on campus, it's roughly about $27,000 every year. And we have this little friend stacking up against us called inflation. Now, we haven't necessarily always had those numbers growing, or they have grown in the last 7 to 10 years quite exponentially. That's kind of why we have a lot of student loan debt in our country, is because the rising costs of tuition. So when we look at inflation can be the cost of goods today versus the cost of goods in the future, right? So thinking about what it costs for tuition today versus when my girls will go to college in 10 to 12 years. That means that $27,000 is going to continue to grow. And then, of course, you have to evaluate in your house, again, is your student someone that might go to a 4-year university? Is your student somebody that might have the opportunity to pursue a trade career? Again, underrated and highly well paid. Not that I'm like advertising for the trade industries, but we will have a lull, and it is a very respectable career to be a tradesman or woman. Tradesperson there. That was probably a better way of saying that. So think about it from those perspectives. What type of college or post-secondary education is your child going to pursue? From there, we need to kind of understand what that cost might be in the future. So that's the importance of financial planning. We use a lot of calculators, being able to work the numbers back and figure out what it is that you need to be able to save. And sometimes that number makes people go, woo, really big bug eyes and are like, oh my God, I didn't think that I was going to have to save that much money for college. So I think it's that element of how much responsibility do you want your student to have? Or as I say, how much skin in the game are you going to let your kid have? Foreman girls, you're getting a preview to your college education. I had skin in the game. I had to pay for my college tuition. My mom did help me. I did have to work 3 jobs the entire time I was in college and ended up graduating in 4.5 years, not 4 years, because I did work all 4 years full time and multiple jobs throughout that time frame. And then I've had individuals in my life who didn't have to worry about getting college funded for them, either by scholarship or by parents who saved well to be able to do that, or grandparents. You see, it's a mixture of those. And that's why, again, you have to have this personal conversation in your household. How much responsibility do you want your child to have? And that looks at many different things, right? So a lot of times I have this conversation with clients about, okay, let's think about college or post-secondary, if we want to refer to it as that. What do you want your children to be responsible for? And how do you want to set them up for success? I know a lot of my clients don't want their students or children to have loans upon graduation, but still want them to gain that value of money so that they're not thinking, oh, well, I can just go do whatever I want to, fail this class, and mom and dad will pay for me to take it again, right? Or not even think about it in that perspective, but just retake the class. You see, that happens. And how do we create more value behind it? I do think that you can do both, and you can teach your kids about money and the value of money and still give them full tuition for college. I think it's about the conversations and the lifestyle that we create in our homes and the value and responsibility in those conversations. And you can also look at it as, well, I want you to have a little bit of this responsibility while you're going to school. So we're going to set aside X amount of dollars. Sometimes individuals say, well, we'll pay for what it costs to attend the University of Minnesota, let's say, public university. And if you decide to go to Princeton, well, the rest of that is on your own. And that on your own could be through grants, scholarships, and loans, which we'll break down a little bit later when we get to the actual strategy part of things. But again, as I always talk about, you need to have these values conversations and these emotional conversations before we get to the strategy. Otherwise, the strategy doesn't mean anything. So setting that bar of how much are you able to do? What goals are you prioritizing in your life? Then how much skin in the game do you want your children to have? Then from there, we can start to build on other opportunities. I will say this one piece that I forgot. So you can give them a little bit of skin in the game and have them pay for it. Or you can do this little tricky element where you make them think that they have skin in the game. They take out loans. And then based on certain metrics that you set aside, you might pay off those student loans for them after college. So there are a lot of other elements. Now, one thing that I want to caution you on, because I am always worried about my personal clients' financial health. Remember, don't sacrifice for your children so that they have to take care of you later in the future. So yes, providing your child with immense amount of great education is truly important because we know the power of education creates successful and responsible individuals in our society, therefore creating a wonderful society in a utopia type of world, right? That being said, let me drill into you that it is not your responsibility to sacrifice your retirement or your life to be able to provide for your children's education. It is an opportunity for you to be able to pull back the lens on what it is that you want those life experiences to be and where you want it to go, and having the conversations early to set your children up for success. So again, just to recap here, understand your values. What's important to you? What are the buckets that you need to personally be saving for? Where does college fall into that? And then how much skin in the game do you want your kids to have? And how will you set that ownership up for them and communicate that to them? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about strategy. And this is a piece where I'm not going to get super in depth about every working piece of these different avenues to fund college, because you see, again, it's very personal. So remember that as we're talking about these things, this is something that you need to be able to evaluate in your own personal situation. So we've got your traditional 529 college savings plan. The reason why this gets talked about so much is they are state specific, or you can have non-state specific plans. You want to be careful which one you plan for, because again, maybe your child doesn't want to go to in-state school. Maybe they want to go somewhere else. Then the likelihood of in-state 529 plans being applicable to other states, you want to make sure that you look into the flexibility on those funds and what you have available for you, investment options, and all of those different things. The really grand piece of why people like 529 plans is they work very similarly to a Roth IRA for retirement. You put the money in after you've paid taxes on it, And then that money grows tax-free. And as long as you take it out for an accredited college qualified expense, post-secondary qualified expense, then you don't pay taxes on any of the growth. Now, that being said, there are a little bit of caveats there. What happens if you save for your child all of the college tuition in that vehicle, and then your child decides not to go to school? Well, the great thing about 529s is you can change the beneficiary if you're the owner. You can change that to a sibling of your child, a niece or nephew. You can change it to yourself if you decide to go back to school. There are lots of different things that you can do for flexibility of the actual beneficiary. Now, if you don't have another beneficiary that you would want to allocate those funds to, then you just need to make sure you're really serious about what avenue that is. The other really great thing is your child could receive a scholarship, and then you might not need those funds anymore. It's not like you can go out and buy a convertible for them to celebrate the fact that they got a scholarship and use the 529 plan money tax-free. That's a big no-no. So you've got your 529 plan. Then there are a couple other vehicles that you can utilize. And I think one of the pieces to think about when we talk about funding is, again, that bucket strategy. So there are restrictions when it comes to the 529 plans. The 529 plans are one bucket that you can save into. You can save into investment vehicles. You can save into Coverdale IRAs. You can save into so a regular investment would be like a taxable investment for yourself, a non-IRA investment where you're paying capital gains potentially, and you're paying dividends as they go. And then you could look at life insurance. There are lots of different buckets that you can look at for investment funding of college. So that's one like bucket with sub buckets. We'll just call it that for today, or different line items within the bucket, lines within the bucket, measurements within the bucket. Maybe I've got to think about different words for this. We'll see. The other aspect is cash flowing it. Perhaps you are someone who can afford to pay the cash to cash flow it while you're working. Maybe you're still working while your kids go to school and you can just pay for it that way. That's one piece of looking at elements that could be tax deductible for you, whether it be, student loan interest in the future that you pull from, but there are also tax credits that you can receive for education. Again, some of those restrictions are going to be based on income levels. And then, the tax credits might not be quite the same as tuition, right? No tax credit is ever the same as what the actual expense is. I know that after sending my kids through daycare. So, again, just to recap, we have the investment buckets, the different types of investment vehicles that you could use. We have you cash flowing it. The next piece is I call it the free money, although it might not necessarily be free, but it's grants and scholarships. And there are so many different types of vehicles that you can use. You can apply through, federal organizations for scholarships, and then there's private scholarships. So I want people to understand that there are millions of scholarships available for just cool things that are fun and funky. I remember applying for scholarships when I was going to college, and they had a website that you could go to. And I'm sure it's so much more jazzed up than it was when I was in college or in high school and looking for college scholarships. But you had the ability to be able to look up scholarships. And I found one. Now, I didn't end up applying for this because I was a little too chicken. Maybe I would for sure do it now. But, when you're a teenager, wrapping yourself in duct tape to create a prom dress is probably not that cool. But I would totally do it now. That would be so fun and adventurous and cool. And I can't remember who the actual donor of the scholarship was, if it was 3M or something like that, but it was something cool. And so there are scholarships out there that are academic based. There are performance based scholarships, athletic scholarships. There are all kinds of different community scholarships, advocacy scholarships, you name it. There are so many out there, and we'll list some resources for scholarship vehicles that you can look up. Oftentimes people ask me, Shannon, when should we start looking up scholarships or start planning for college? Well, you should start planning for college as early as you can, because again, the expenses will increase and you've got to understand your values and where that positions in your lifespan. But for scholarships, most people think, well, like your senior year, right? Like that's when you should be starting to think about scholarships. No, start thinking about them at the earliest, or at the latest, your sophomore, junior year, because you can start to understand what you need to be able to achieve, or what your child needs to be able to achieve to get a scholarship, right? So what are the things that they need to work towards? I often see, that senior scramble where you are applying for these scholarships, but now you've got to get this grade point average, or you've got to be participating in this many activities. And that burns out and overwhelms us. Again, try to plan for some of those things. Try to start having those conversations with your kids at an early age. What are their interests? What do they want to be able to do? Are they in sports? Are they in theater? Are they really into their academics? Are they in chess club? Are they in mathematics, robotics, all of these different things? There are so many scholarships that are out there that can be just based on who your child is, and you don't have to recreate the wheel. I'd also encourage you that many employers offer college scholarships for their employees' children as well. I know when I was applying for scholarships, my mom worked for Target at the time. I don't know if Target does this anymore. You guys can let me know if they do, but they had a college scholarship available. I applied for it and I did get it. And you have to reapply every year, and you got to make sure that you stay on top of those things. But that scholarship thing is not a game you should snooze on. It is something that you should start early and often. And there are scholarships that are available for financial needs and not financial needs. Now, that's the scholarship side of things for the quote unquote free money part of things. And then there's grant eligibility. So grant is going to be federal dollars that are given, and they're forgiven. So they're not loans. You don't pay those back. There are Pell grants, which are needs-based grants. And then there are a few other grants that are available as well. You might want to explore whether or not you would be able to apply for them. There are going to be lots of different types of regulations around those grants, and grants are usually a longer process, but it's not something that you should overlook if you think that you and your family would be if it would be applicable for you. For instance, for me, when I went to college, I had scholarships, I had Pell grants, I paid for it. We had loans. It was a mixture of all of the things to get to the point where we were able to fund me going to school. So again, just to recap, we've got the different investment buckets that we can fill. We've got cash flowing ourselves. We've got the free money bucket, quote unquote, right? And that would be your scholarships and grants. Now, the last piece is going to be the loans. Loans can come in private fashion or in, again, federal fashion. Now, from a federal standpoint, I will break down just a few for you. And then there's the private loans. And then I want to talk about the interest from those aspects of things and just how to be careful when applying for loans as well. So there are all of your direct federal loans. One is subsidized, one is unsubsidized. So subsidized loans are for undergraduates who demonstrate financial needs to cover their cost of college. Unsubsidized are basically for anyone and is not need-based. Then there are the plus loans that are available for graduate or professional students and parents of undergrads. So that's your parent plus loans. That's not available on financial need. You don't need to have, there are no credit checks or anything. Those are just things that you apply for. And then, of course, at the end of everything, you can consolidate your loans. Now, it depends usually on whether or not they're subsidized or unsubsidized. And many times you'll have multiple loans depending on the years that you went to school, and you will refinance those or consolidate those based on subsidized and unsubsidized, because they will have different payment options. And depending on the interest that is earned during those periods of time as well. Then there are private loans where you can Not that I recommend this in the least bit, but some individuals use the equity in their homes. They go use a line of credit. They will get a private loan. They'll get from their banking institution. I would say that is about the last, that's the last basis that I would go to. For instance, for individuals who want to use the equity in their home and think that the interest would be tax deductible because you're borrowing against your home, you're not going to be able to deduct the taxes or the interest, or excuse me, you're not going to be able to deduct the interest on your tax returns from that because that's not allowed anymore. You can only deduct the interest on a home equity line of credit if you are like actually using it for home improvements. So unless, of course, you decide to refinance and then fix that rate as a fixed rate loan, then you may have to talk to a tax professional about what that looks like. That would be like your last resort of funding. I think you need to think about, what are the aspects of funding through the four other places first before you go to that privatized loan situation. I think that's where people can really get in a hurting situation where then you're carrying debt from generation to generation and not having that be, in the future. You don't want to send your kids to college just for them to financially have to provide for you in the future. You want to send them to college or post-secondary so they have a really successful financial life, right? Not that they have to have a really successful financial life and then have to take care of you. So those are the elements that we want to think about. A couple of things that I want you to truly have an understanding for are that there is flexibility in your plan and that you are aligning with where you are in your financial life and your financial picture. What are those priorities for saving? How are you going to have your kids participate in this? It is a great avenue of educating our children, young or adult children, about money and the responsibility of being able to pay those. Lastly, I want to talk about repayment. So let's get to graduation day. You have student loans and you're wondering, how do I repay these? What do I do? So let's talk about that a little bit. As a parent, maybe you're at the situation where your kid did hit those metrics and now you're like, you know what? We are going to take care of these loans for you and you're going to pay them off. That's absolutely wonderful. And then there are going to be others who are going to actually graduate with student loan debt. I did, my husband did, and we managed to pay those off too. And I have friends of mine who graduated from college and started paying on them right away and had a goal of paying them off for 5 years and lived very simply and didn't live like this super luxurious lives. But I want you to think about it from a graduation standpoint. Do we want to create wealth for our kids or have our kids have the ability to be able to create wealth? When you start your adult life and you already are crippled with debt, it's the opportunity to really have those conversations before we get them to that point. We want our kids to be able to have that financial freedom. And even if you don't have all of the luxuries to be able to give your kid a full ride, full pay situation, let's talk about how we can create a healthy relationship. Let's talk about scholarships and grants and things like that they can apply for before they get to that point. There's so much financial support on the table to help fund college that it doesn't have to be a situation that cripples them for debt afterwards. Now, that being said, prioritize the debt with the highest interest, consolidate where you can, and get really aggressive about making those payments. This isn't a life about keeping up with whoever is around the block or at the water cooler or what is trending on social media. If you want to create wealth and true financial independence, you've got to be able to pay off that debt first. So try not to graduate with an immense amount of debt. If you're in that situation, prioritize that as a debt repayment. And as always, make sure that this is something that you talk about in-depthly and you don't just take flying by the seat of your pants advice from everybody else around you. Your financial picture is very personal and it deserves a conversation. And of course, as always, we'd love to be that partner for you if this is a conversation that you want to be able to have. If you have not listened to our other podcasts this month. We have a series all about going back to school. We're talking about relationships with your teenage child. We are talking about empty nesting. What do you do for yourself after your children leave the nest? And then also, how do we pass on healthy financial behaviors? So stay tuned for all of those episodes, and please tune in and share. As always, we are so thankful for you participating and being a part of this Forethought family.